Okay, so because I am in this incredibly privileged position where I get to moderate, thank you incredibly much for the three speakers opening discussions. I think, over the last 3 years of doing this project, the time aspect of it, I think, has become more and more important to me, at least. And I think about sort of the golden record as, if it gets found, it took 50 years to leave the solar system. It'll take 40,000 years to get to the nearest star. It's a lot of space and a lot of time. And it is an actual vinyl record. And that's the level of technology. They invented a new way to encode vinyl records at the time to double the amount of content on there. But it was the cutting edge of technology, but we'll look back at it and go, wow, it was a vinyl record. We're way past that. And that was only 50 years ago. We in our message, we'd looked at how do we talk about artificial intelligence, and ChatGPT had just come out, and there was this incredible fear across the world about what artificial intelligence was going to do and take over the world in the next couple of years. And we already think about this very differently now, and that's only 3 years ago. And I think that also informed our first message. So the Aspire 1 mission, probably the main focus project on that is a 45-minute video of daily life. And the idea is that whoever finds this, if it's humans in the far future, this would be interesting to them. What do we spend our days doing in 2022? There's two particular areas that I would maybe like to start off with. I think that time is so ingrained in our language that we tend to not even think about it as much. I was for this talk at UNESCO. I was in New York, and in New York is the type of place where you don't meet somebody at a place more than you also meet them at a time. I will be there in about 25 minutes or about 45 minutes, depending on. It's not the distance or the place that I'm going to. It's how long it's going to take me to get there. Whereas if I'm in a desert, or if I'm in a place that doesn't have as much people and busyness, I will meet somebody at a particular place and I can make a very particular time. It is very much in our language and how we reference ourselves in the world. And I maybe just wanted to start off with maybe just a quick definition from the three speakers of how they would personally define time in one or two sentences. And I know that I'm putting people on the spot here. At this point, I'm going to say hands up. If you got one off the bat and you want to start off with out of the three speakers, please, let me know. If none of you can come up with a definition, I'm going to go on to my next topic.
I don't really have a good definition. I would just say it's, I was trying to teach it in class or something. I would say it's another one of the dimensions of the universe, but it's uniquely a dimension which we have no choice but to move forward with it. And that's what distinguishes it, the unidirectional nature of time as compared to the three dimensions of space. So there's something different about it in that sense. Yeah.
Fantastic. Other two speakers?
I suppose the philosophers want to claim that there is a forward arrow of time, but it may not be logical to go back in time. It may be physically impossible, and you'd have to obey certain rules, and there'd be some interesting questions for free will. But it might be that time is like the other dimensions, and that you can explore it and move around it.
This is perfect because my next theme is the arrow of time versus the Jello universe. Amy?
So to me, there's many different kinds of time. There's the kind of time that we have created, the measurable time, the time that Nick Sarah was talking about, like it's today, it's Monday morning. There's the biological time. Then there's this emergence of the time that we have created and so internalized that it affects our internal states. And then there's another kind of being in time, where time is an unfolding presence it's an unfolding presence that we're always in, that river that I mentioned.
Awesome. So yeah, and I think there are enough people in this room that might know if this is true or not. But one of the things that really kind of struck me a while ago was that there was an argument when they sent the first GPS satellites into space that Einstein's time relativity was, it was a great theory, but maybe it wasn't true. And they basically had to set the clocks in two different modes to account for it and not to account for it. And essentially what happens is if you move away from a body of mass, time moves slightly slower. So if you've got a GPS satellite that's geostationary and it needs time to basically work out where it is, and essentially it proved Einstein's theory, because if it didn't account for the slowing of time, it was out by like half a meter every couple of days or something. And that's kind of amazing. That's kind of an amazing thing that time is different. We experience time differently, but like time is actually different relative to a body of mass like the Earth, right? And if you take the sun into account, you can kind of like, you can see around the sun, and use kind of a whole lot of things around that. So, the idea of time not being sort of an arrow of time going in a direction and being more of this, like what I would maybe poorly reference as like a block of jello, where, it is relative to each other and there is the possibility to go forward at least. I'm going to open it up. For discussion. And then I think once we have reached some sort of a place of discussion, then I'm also going to open it up for the group. So I think if you want to start leaving some questions in the chat now, please do start doing that. And we can start getting into some of those. And then I'm also going to open it up to the group to have comments as well, because we're all a clever bunch here and we all have opinions about these sort of things. So, does anybody of our speakers, would any of you like to start off?
I'd be interested to ask Amy a question, which is that given these different ways in which time can be expressed, and it seems that there is something personal about the way that we experience the passage of time. I think a lot of people will have felt that during COVID, that time slowed down in dramatic ways and then maybe sped up at others. To try and recreate an experience like that in art seems like a great challenge, and that you could play with our subjective experience of time with an objective art installation. What are the ways you think this can be best achieved?
So this is like definitely where different forms of art can relay this. Immersive art is really great as one opportunity where you go into a space and immediately have a different sensation. Sound art, moving art, time-based art is really amazing too. Sound can bring about these transformations as well, because there's different sounds that resonate within the body and actually change how the body feels and can change synchronization of time. So in the echoes of Valley of Existence that I showed you, actually I have the image here. The sound, which I didn't play too much here, was based on frequencies from research at Stanford University that makes the heart go into different cymatic forms. It actually brings about healing frequencies. So, the science might not all be proven for this yet, but in art, we can have an experience of this. And if it doesn't work so well, it's pleasing sound. But for the people that do have an experience, it could be quite profound of changing their state when they go into it. So this idea of a state change, like what brings about a state change? That as I'm talking through it, I think this is something really powerful that art can do, but also other mediums can do, and we have access to doing really at any moment. So then I feel like the question is, what state do you want to bring about? And this is where I feel like I'm questioning into the far future. Like, what is the future we want to create? And how do we do something in the moment to make a decision that could potentially impact these far futures that are beyond humans, I think, human imagination. Even though we could try, we can't really foresee.
Do we as the three speakers, is the arrow of time? Is there an arrow of time, or is there a block of relative time? Do we have opinions? Do we have disagreements?
I feel like I fight the arrow of time, that our measured time is an arrow. But I see that is not, it's not a truth in my body, in my experience. And when I am engaging the arrow of time, it causes pain and suffering. It's that, and that is like a personal practice and issue. So that's kind of forced me to see time as much more nebulous.
So I think that the relentless march of time will catch up with all of us, regardless of how we feel about it. That we will, like the universe will have a heat death. We're all going to die because of time. I think what we can do is change our subjective experience of time, and I think art is one way to bring about nostalgic feelings that transport us to earlier stages in our life, that can create that sensation of being a 5-year-old child and that kind of internal time traveling. I think thinking about relationships with time is very interesting, and how once we start to change those parameters, we start to think that a lot of things that we place enormous amount of importance on are unimportant. And I really loved David's example of thinking about the evolution of us from single cells and then projecting forward and thinking about what that would look like. And there's a sense in which you could think of it as a mere doubling, or you could think of it as this telescopic evolution, that as time marches on, the rate at which change occurs marches on even more rapidly. And we see that, for example, with sending off the golden record, how dramatically our technology has shifted in the last 50 years. And so there's a sense in which it's inconceivable for us to think about our distant future. There's a moral philosophy movement called long-termism, the idea that we should try and do the best possible thing. We should donate as much as possible to charities, but the best ones. And we should have a long-term view on this, like maybe 1,000 years. And then I start to think, what did our ancestors know 1,000 years ago that would be useful for us now? There'd be some things, but there'd be a lot that their predictions would be just absolutely terrible about. And so maybe when we do some forward planning, we should actually be much more conservative about that, given how fast changes happen. Maybe even 20 years is too far in the future to imagine.
So Mark and David, I'd like to ask you, what are your personal relationships with time? And do you have, I don't know if spiritual is the right word, but a personal relationship with time? It may be spiritual, or you may not call it that. But I'd love to hear more about that. Because I feel like we don't talk about that often. Like, we all have our unique relationship with time, and we assume everybody thinks time is the same, and it's so different for us.
Sure. I would say that it's kind of like an enemy in one sense, right? Because it's the clock against we're all fighting. And so I feel a certain degree of urgency in my life to achieve the things I want to achieve, and take stock of the moments that pass, because they are, I think the unidirectional nature of time means that you never get those back. And so every moment is extremely precious. I think it would be less precious if backwards time travel was possible. It would almost dilute that preciousness that it has to us, to value those moments. And the other aspect I think about is sort of with immortality and some folks who want to live forever. And I've always been inspired a little bit by words that Alan Watts wrote about this. And he was talking about the nature of children, and how having children is such a integral part of why society almost works, in a sense. So if we wanted to live forever, we'd eventually become bored of everything. And I see this already. I have young children, and they will be fascinated by the most mundane things, like a crack on the wall or something. And to me, I don't even notice it. And I just fear that as we get older, we'd become more and more beaten down by time, and we just sort of lose all the novelty of what's special about the world. And so I think children are just such the next generation, whatever form that takes, is just a crucial component, because it not only reminds the previous generation of what's special about life, but they get to rediscover things afresh and take new perspectives on things. So I think even though it's an enemy because I'm going to run out of time eventually, it's a necessary enemy, because otherwise I would probably have a torturous existence, was it not for that finality at some point.
So I'm glad that you raised immortality. It's a topic we've spoken about quite a lot on Brain Navat, and there are the immortality curmudgeons who think that ultimately, if you lived forever, that you would die of boredom, that it would be awful having to necessarily repeat all the existences, all the things that you've gone through over and over and over again ad infinitum. It's very hard for us to imagine what infinity looks like. There are a couple of interesting responses to it, and the one is thinking about our persistence over time, and one route where your body could be immortal, but where your memories slowly faded, would allow for you to have those periods of novelty. You could have, let's say, extended arcs over time. And we might think that our own lives are like that, I don't share the memories of my newborn self. I share the DNA, but I don't share the cells. And so I might think that I owe my existence to my past self, but it's much more like an ancestor than me. And so you could take the view that if we were immortal, that we would have these overlapping, linking arcs that would be meaningful and valuable. And I suppose the one concern is that it's hard to have the ability to have children and immortality without a massive overpopulation problem. But one way to solve that would be to be off planet, to encompass many other places, and you could imagine a series of immortal beings who are able to fill their lives with novelty. If there was some loss of memory, or if we think about how much new material can be infinitely created, think about the depth of something like ChatGPT. It could be that you've got two infinites running in parallel, and that the one would never bore you then.
I've had this idea of a science fiction novel floating around in my head, and the story's kind of almost there. And it's this idea that we have figured out how not to die, and then we've also figured out a whole bunch of the social implications of managing that. And it's a couple of million or so years, and boredom is, in my mind, boredom would be the biggest problem. And it really struck me that once you have marginal rates of diminishing return of once you've had cake a million times, it's not as good. And a good way to solve that would be to, the novel is essentially a Matrix-esque thing where we choose to have a life, and we basically decide to get born into a life, and we choose this life, and we live for 100 or so years, and we remember these lives when we go back. But it's a great way to spend 100 or so years. Mike has got a question, but before I pass it over to Mike to ask his question, because we've got a nice team here, I would like to take a group photo. So if everybody could turn on their cameras, because I know we are also getting close-ish to time. So turn on your cameras, because you're gonna be on, and we're gonna count it down. We're gonna have to do two photos. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Nice. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Nice. Awesome. Thanks, peeps. Mike, if you could ask a question. I was going to ask, but I think it's better coming from you, because you can give it a bit of context as well.
Well, I've heard multiple different time frames, all of which I think affect our behaviors and our decision making, mentioned on this call by the speakers, which are all fantastic. Thank you for your presentations. So obviously chronological time, clock time, the ticking clock, biological time, the times of our lives, which gives us a sense of the hereafter or what will exist when we're gone or what existed before we were born. Geological time, which is the time of the Earth and the planets. All of those have come up, but what hasn't come up is serendipity time, opportunity time, or kairos. And I'm interested in what the speakers might have to say about that. My own experience, and I'll just go back to something that happened in my childhood. Our farm, which was not a large farm, but when I was a kid, the line between the east and central time zones was a county line, and it passed through our family's farm. And so for certain times a year, which is coming up next weekend, I could jump back and forth in time. I could jump from 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock and back again. And I would always think about what time it was when I was in the air. And that to me was the transcendent moment. You know, that was kairotic time. I had the opportunity to time shift. So I'm interested in what the speakers might have to say about that particular framing of time, how that might affect the project or their own perceptions and reflect in their work.
I'd like to say first, make sure we're all on the same page, Mark and David. Would you agree that Chronos is the structured linear aspect of time? Or how would you describe it? Yeah.
I've actually I've only heard of it in terms of Greek mythology. I haven't heard of it in the context that you're describing. Yeah.
And Mike, are you a Hoosier?
Sorry, so
I was a Hoosier a long time ago. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's right. Pike County and Du Bois County was the dividing line. It's not anymore. But I used to tell my dad, who was a dreamer, and he tried to turn our farm into a theme park. I used to say, let's build a wedding chapel on that timeline, and between midnight and 1 a.m., people could get married, and they would have 2 anniversary days if they stood on either side of the timeline. And we never built the chapel, but I would think about things like that.
Well, to me, I think, to answer your question, shared linear framework of time is, as an artist, I'm very open to things that happen, things that unfold in the process of making. I never really go into a project knowing what it's going to look like at the end. And when those events unfold, things happen like by chance, or I don't know, when things just happen that are out of my control. This is when I feel like the artwork kind of takes over. So when I look at that in terms of a structured linear aspect of time, it isn't a rigid sequence. It becomes almost like a rhythm that moments of serendipity emerge or spontaneity emerge, or things happen that we can't control, and aligning things in ways that almost feel almost like divinely orchestrated in a way that is beyond our understanding, or just, maybe it's just by chance. But that's kind of how I maybe look at time a little bit more. And if I'm going to look at a structured linear aspect of time, like an intention and emergence engagement, which maybe is a little bit more the Greek mythology too.
I think what you're saying also relates to Csikszentmihalyi's flow state, right? The focus brings about flow, and then Chronos melts away, and Kairos can kind of have its say.
It makes the space-time makes a ground or framework where moments of synchronicity or insight can emerge from.
So I'll tell you 2 things. The one is that a way to cheat time is to fill your life with lots of novelty and variety. That I think people feel that time passes very rapidly if they're doing the same thing every day. And so I've tried to have as much variety as I can. One way that I feel like I've built a little serendipity machine is running a podcast. So once a week I get to summon up some brilliant academic philosopher and ask them all sorts of questions, hear their views. And that creates a wonderful sense of shifting your mind by being exposed to this variety of things. And I get to build up a kind of big quilt of philosophy. And the advantage is I can, pick out a particular tile in that quilt and pose it to another philosopher and, come at them from a different angle, getting someone who cares about free will to think about philosophy of time problems and how they intersect. That creates these little serendipitous moments where some new idea sparks. So yeah, I think trying to carve out variety in your life is one way to have that moment of jumping up in the air and wondering where you are. I love that little story that you told.
Awesome. A question for David Kipping. What do you think of when I ask of cosmological time and the universe's future? What role do you think time plays in our desire to explore space? Well, that's more than one question. How do you think how do you think our understanding of time might change as we explore deeper into space? That's a cracker right there.
Yeah. Yes. I think there's actually more, rather than cosmology, I'm kind of thinking of black holes as one of the best experiments to hopefully give us some progress in understanding time. So there's a very strange phenomenon that happens if you cross an event horizon and pass into a black hole, where this normal thing we've been talking about, where we can move in space but not in time, reverses. And actually the axes rotate 90 degrees inside a black hole. So you actually have no choice. We talk about like falling towards the singularity, and we have to think of the singularity of a black hole as a location in space, but it's actually not. It's a location in time in the far, far future. And that's the point which you have no choice but to strike. And so the fact that you get this reversal of the axes is really intriguing, and it potentially is giving us hints about how time really works. So, for instance, a recent insight by studying black holes has been the holographic principle. So it turns out that you can explain everything, all the information inside a black hole, just by the surface, what's contained within the surface of the event horizon. And the most well-cited theoretical physics paper ever written was just about 10 years ago on the holographic principle. And it shows that you can extend this to the whole universe. So take the whole universe, take all the stuff going on inside it, and you could always describe everything using just the two-dimensional surface of the entire universe. And so that's really changing the way we think about both time and space, because it implies that this dimensionality that we see, the 3+1 dimensionality, is not real. It's just an illusion. And we are literally just these holographic stick figures walking around in what we think is a deeper space, but it's not. So I think that's where I'm most excited about seeing progress, is the theoretical work on black holes seems to be the case where physics breaks down, and yet it's almost accessible because we can imagine creating black holes in the laboratory and we have access to them in the universe. So I think that's where we're going to get the most progress.
Amazing. Super. Like I didn't realize that time and space flip in a black hole. I'll be bringing that one out in cocktail parties for years to come now.
One of the greatest goals in physics at the moment. And it seems like black holes could be a connection. Another example I'll give you is quantum entanglement. So you probably have heard of like spooky action at a distance. And that seems to happen instantaneously, right? So if you which seems strange, right? So if you flip the state of one thing, it flips the state of its antipair instantaneously. But relativity tells us that there's no such thing as a simultaneous event. So, I'm speaking and you're listening to me at the same time in the frame of reference of the Earth. But if a spaceship flew by close to the speed of light, they would see me talking, and then later they would see you listening. Like the order of events gets mixed up depending on the direction of the travel. So Einstein would tell us that a simultaneous event doesn't make any sense. Whereas quantum entanglement is saying, no, you have to have this simultaneous snap of these two states. So the two theories just don't work together. They treat time completely differently. And that's where I think we're going to get the most progress.
Amy correctly said that now we're getting into it. Now we're getting interesting. So I am going to record again, but this might be for like our takes and for wherever we use it. Okay, I'm now going to open it up to the whole group. Ask your questions, come up with your comments. How do you think about time? What is interesting about time for you? Sammy.
Hello. Just want to say I absolutely loved this meeting. Just so stimulating philosophically. And also, Amy, I love what you're doing with your artist work as well. And I always think about this concept of time and like, I don't know, are we our own cosmological singularity, whatever that means? Like, I resonated with what you said about the cymatics, like from my own personal experience and sound healing and frequencies. And by having that sense of like presence and this sense of the eternal now, it really makes us think about when we're sending messages to space, what does that mean in the perspective of time if we're sending, I don't know, human DNA. So I guess that's my question for the speakers. If we are sending human DNA on this golden archived deep space and it's received somehow, somewhere, what does that even mean with the implications of time?
So to me, this is perhaps the greatest intelligence we can share. Right? Everything else is a representation of other things. If we're sharing what we know about science, we're trying to represent the world through the lens of science or art. And all those are valuable cultural contributions. We don't know that future finders will be able to engage that. But the DNA or seeds potentially have so much information with them inherently that is a different intelligence. So in relationship to time, I don't know what that means in relationship to time, other than the ways that I spoke about it, of where it could land. And maybe that's where David and Mark could pick up on. But that is like one thing that I think about often, about the intelligence of what is being shared. And maybe an intro to that is I'm trying to think about the things we all agree on, Mark, David, and I. And one thing I was put down as a note is that maybe we all agree on that time is a continuum beyond human perception. But I wanted to ask you what you thought. And that also might tie into this sending messages to the future, we don't know what's.
So, Amy, one of the things I liked about your project of sending DNA off into space, that you imagined two different versions of that. You know, the one where you seed life on other planets, and that is one account of where we come from. That life was seeded on this planet by something else, and the other one is that you send off something devastating. You know, that you send off a plague that wipes out life on another planet. And I suppose if you think about once you stretch time out, small things can make an incredible difference. And so it becomes quite hard to think about the ramifications of it. And you might think that like ethical considerations completely break down under long periods of time. But that in, short periods of time, we can make some kind of judgment about them.
Yeah, maybe I could just add on to that I had a question as well for you that about contamination of other planets and things. So like one thing NASA's like really concerned about is accidental contamination of genetic material or biological samples onto Mars or whatever planets we're visiting. And I heard the opposite view when I've been at the Breakthrough meeting. So Breakthrough is trying to send like an interstellar probe into space. And some of the, I won't say who, but some people in that team are like, that humanity is the king of the universe, basically. So we should put our DNA into this thing and spread it deliberately. We should try to like infect other planets because that's our sort of, we are the apex of the universe. So we have a responsibility to do this almost. And I kind of always kind of like was uncomfortable with that. It was like, harking back to sort of colonization era stuff. But I just wondered if you thought about the impact of contamination and how you think about that. Yeah.
I think from my perspective, I sit on both sides. I think on the idea of the responsibility of life and who we are. And if we are alone, then our responsibility to maybe not necessarily spread life as far as possible, but to secure the idea that life could exist if we decide to destroy it here. I think there's a part of it where the slowness of these messages does give us a lot of time. You know, this asteroid mission is going to be coming back to the solar system. It's definitely not going to be landing on any other planet. Voyager will take 40,000 years to get to our nearest star. You know, I sometimes think if we haven't figured out a way to go and fetch it in 40,000 years, we're definitely slowed down in our progression as a species. But I think it is one of the points where it is an incredibly important conversation in what we do. And it's an incredibly important discussion in what we choose to do as well, around these things. I'm going to also leave that open to the group as well to give input on that. If we do have a little bit of time, though, we should ask David about the journey to the end of the universe. Because if you think about time in that scale, what happens after all of the stars have burnt out, all of the energy has done its thing, and how much time we still have after that? It's kind of crazy. But yes, I'm going to open it up to the group about, you know, how do we think about sending DNA in particular, and life onto other planets and into space. No. Heather?
I'll say something. I mean, I keep thinking about this in the context of here we are, adults who to some extent do not live with the same ramifications of human impact on time and evolution on Earth as our kids are. And I just keep thinking it would be so interesting to hear their take on it, because they're at a point in time where their experience of time is very different than an adult's. And yet, I think we underestimate some of the profundity of their experiences. So that's where I'm at.
I love that. I love the idea that for a 2-year-old, 1 year is double the amount of existence they have experienced in the world, right? For me, a year is like 1/43rd or something.
Yeah.
You know, it is an incredible difference relative to that experience of time.
And I think that when we talk about like the impact of, like, as Amy was pointing out, how we experience time when you're in flow, sort of that you're so immersed, so that time essentially ceases to exist as something that you are actively experiencing. And that is something that we all kind of seek in terms of knowing that we're really hitting our stride in terms of our passions and interests and work. And yet for a kid, that's, for some, like in certain age groups, that's just their daily experience, right? Like, just watch a 2-year-old, right? Like, their day is all about flow. So, you know, so yeah, so many ideas.
Love it. Sally?
I would say in animals too. You know?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I haven't really thought about humans having the responsibility to seed life. But I was thinking how we have always, humans have been spaceships in terms of global history, carrying our DNA onto other continents. And I feel like that's one place to look at the results. What has been the effect of our colonization of other lands, and there's been a lot of destruction involved in that. Yes, I'm probably more conservative along those lines. I think anytime we go into space, we are seeding there's the possibility that our DNA disperses in ways that we don't maybe understand at this point, but particularly if we're starting to land on the moon and create colonies and whatnot, we will inadvertently be doing that, I think.
Yeah. We are the last generation that looks at a moon that doesn't have a permanent human habitation. If the plans continue the way that they're going, it's like I think trying to not contextualize as much as explain humanity. My current feeling about us is that we're not so bad. We're not as bad as we think we are, I think. And I say this in the way that I think we have gone through. So we often talk about sort of like who would find this message. So to find the message, we have to basically have some sort of parameters. And one of the parameters is that who's going to find this message is somebody who can build a spacecraft and launch that spacecraft. So, do you need eyes to do that? Do you need ears to do that? Do you need to be a collective species to do that? You definitely need to have invented the wheel before you launch a spacecraft. Maybe not. Maybe you could do a wheelless spacecraft. Maybe you could go to rockets before that. But we have evolved as a species, both socially as well as technologically, and we continue to evolve. And the world, growing up in apartheid South Africa, the world is much better now than it was 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 500 years ago. And I think we evolve socially, and we've gone through these things, and we've made many, many, many mistakes. That kind of makes me think, what is our purpose as a species, as life? And again, I think if we are the only species that we know of that is alive, I think there's an incredible responsibility, firstly, to stay alive and to be a witness to the universe. It seems like a lot of space that would be a little bit boring if nobody was experiencing it. And maybe that's just my sort of value of experience. It's like, there's just a lot of rock and stuff. And, I think we as a species add to that through our experience of it. Whether that means that we should go out and populate other planets, I have read enough science fiction. Is it Tchaikovsky? Not Tchaikovsky. I forget his name. He was on our podcast. He wrote this incredible book about essentially from a spider's perspective of another planet. Adrian Tchaikovsky. Yeah, it's incredible. It's a great book on sort of how we think about life on other planets. But yeah, that's my feeling. I think I don't think we're bad as much as we're still finding our way. Yeah.
I wouldn't mind asking David something. So, when we think about a shooting star, is it one metaphor say we're looking back in time? This is an event that occurred a very long time ago, and we're now seeing that. Is that an accurate way of describing it, that we're looking back in time, or is there a better way to describe what we're seeing?
Yeah. It doesn't really make sense. Sometimes people say, well, that star, we see one explode and it's 4,000 light years away. And so truly it did explode 4,000 years ago. And so you might ask, well, what's it doing now? Maybe this star is completely obliterated in that explosion. There's nothing left. What's left there now? But that question of what's happening now we're almost not allowed to ask it in relativity. You can't, there's no way to causally ever speak of the state of that star as it is in our current reference time. And so it's a little bit of a cop-out, but science often says, if we can't, and I'm sure as a philosopher you'd be familiar with this, that if we can't if we can't experimentally do anything about that or test it or interrogate it, it's almost a question that's off limits, right? It's metaphysics, essentially. You've crossed that threshold. So it almost doesn't make sense from a strictly physics perspective to talk about the current state of the star any more than it does to talk about what's outside the universe. So if it's outside the universe, it's by definition unobservable. So, that's where fairies and fantasies live. I don't know, you can put anything in that box. But of course we can, predict what would happen to the star, and 4,000 years later, when the light finally reaches us, we could ask a question like that. But it is a little bit unsatisfying, but I think science tries to dodge that question and strictly concern itself with questions that we can actually make experiments of.
How do we represent time on messages? And I would put this out there in a couple of different ways. What I have realized, putting a message together, is the fractal nature of our understanding of the world. The more granular or the less granular we go, it changes, and we have to decide. I think Amy just put in a comment about sort of our the way that we culturally think about time differently, and how different cultures talk about time and think about time. Do we represent time as a way of communication? Could we represent, because for me, that would always be a great thing, is if we could use time as a way to start a conversation, because we both, whoever finds the message and ourselves, we experience time. So there's a commonality there, and we know that, and we generally look for commonalities. So I'm going to put this out to the group. How do we talk about time and messages? Could we use it as a method of communication? All ideas and comments are welcome and encouraged. Rowan.
Long time no see. Sorry about the radio silence for the last while. It's been a really, really intense few months. This has been a really, really, really inspiring session, and I really love that question about how do we represent that. And actually, I wanted to take it, and I wanted to ask it back to yourself, Nick, and to David Kipping as well. One thing that I often see cropping up in sci-fi world building is, well, how do we represent time if we want to send these messages? And, what reference point would potentially other forms of intelligence throughout, or at least our own Milky Way, have? And a lot of people keep going back to the Hertzsprung-Russell diagram. Would the civilization have an understanding of at what stage a K-class star would be, or what stage a G-class star would be at? When you first had those pioneers sent out, everyone remembers that gold plaque, and they were very, very keen to try and have a representation of our own sun at its stage in its stellar revolution, so that, maybe theoretically someone could pick up and say, okay, right, this is, what we have as our own, HR analog. Effectively, we can plot the star's evolution, so we know that the civilization was maybe this many billion years old, when this message was first sent out. But again, that's, a lot of speculation right there. Would they understand it? And I'm probably leaving the answer to this to much better minds than mine.
I'm going to quickly jump into the one idea, because I'm going to leave the star stuff to David, because he will know much more about that. Quickly, Rowan, though, are you still at the Max Planck Institute?
I have been at the European Space Agency for the past year. So I've now been doing astronaut outreach. So I was the head astronaut outreach coordinator for Andreas Mogensen and Marcus Quant. So I've been juggling a lot of back and forth between ESA, between Axiom, between NASA, taken a couple of weeks leave so I could go off and finally present my thesis at IAC, met with Antonio Stark. We both bonded over you.
Nice. Awesome. I chatted to him today.
Yeah, we miss you. It's great to finally meet these wonderful faces and meet them in person. Yeah, it's back to ESA again full time. So I'm taking a couple of weeks. One of my short films is currently in the distribution process, so I'm hoping to have it done for the film festival circuits next summer.
Amazing. Well, let's definitely catch up.
I would love that. I'd really, really love that. I missed you, man.
Yeah, you too, man. You too. So the idea that sort of is also floated is isotopes. The idea that if we put on an isotope, it's the half-life of the isotope could show sort of the pathway of time. I'm unsure which isotope we would pick and what they would actually look like, but that was the one idea. I'm going to leave the star stuff up to David, but I also think you might get a good answer from Amy as well, because she's done a whole bunch of talking to a whole bunch of people on this as well. So,
okay, I'm not sure I fully understood the question. Could you just say it a bit more concisely, Rowan?
One potential way we could indicate time on a message is to give some kind of indication of at what stage our own host star is on its stellar evolution based on the HR diagram, assuming that an alien civilization might have their own equivalent of the HR diagram, so that if they were to see it, they would say, okay, this was sent when this civilization star was at this length, and we can, if they were ever to track us down or find where our location in the Milky Way is, they would say, okay, they sent it out on this time of the star's evolution. We have a rough fixture of how many billion years their planet was when they sent it out. Would that work as a nice analog for a hypothetical intelligence who would pick up a signal? So it's a speculation raised by Nick's question about, how do we depict time in these messages?
What I can say is that it's very hard to age stars in astronomy. So we really struggle with that, actually. So it turns out, I did say the sun will change in luminosity over time, but it's a pretty small amount over billions of years. And so typically, when we detect a star and we put ages on it, the ages are like, oh, this star is between 1 billion years and 9 billion years old. And like anything in that range is possible. So our ages are generally not very good. And I think it would be hard to use the sun as a reliable clock. But there are good clocks in the universe. And like pulsars come to mind. They're a much better clock.
Yeah, pulsar.
Very, very precise. So yeah, I would think, or even the motion of stars in the neighborhood. Like the nearest star right now is Proxima Centauri, but in about I think 400,000 years, I think another star, I think Wolf 359 comes in closer. So the orientation of the neighborhood actually changes as well.
I got my hand up because I'm a good person on hands up stuff. David, quick one. If we took a photo of the Milky Way galaxy today, would that change? And would we have to have our relative position included in that? Does the Milky Way galaxy, when it revolves, we go around the Milky Way galaxy every 250 million years or 250,000 years?
Yeah, million, I think. Yeah,
250 million years.
It does change. Obviously, our position, it changes. And in a few billion years, Andromeda will hit us, and then that will completely reorganize the galaxy. And there's continuously mergers. There's lots of minor gas streams and minor galaxies all around us that keep falling in. So yeah, the galaxy is changing. It's just hard to predict. It's kind of chaotic and messy, and we don't really have particularly great models to say like, okay, well, exactly. We can't even do it for the solar system. So if you just simulate the solar system and go forward a billion years, in about 1% of simulations, Earth and Venus swap places, right? So they actually change over in order in the solar system, and Mercury gets kicked out altogether. And that's just in a billion years. So we really can't even predict the future of the solar system very well, let alone the whole galaxy. So this is chaos theory, right? Things are just like the butterfly effect, like even a slight change propagates and has massive repercussions and changes the entire order of planets eventually. So yeah, it's difficult to make those predictions. But I just want to say I have to run at half past because I have my group meeting. But thank you everyone for this session. It was really inspiring.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Great
David.
ideas.
You're awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, I enjoyed your presentation too. It was excellent. Thank you so much, Amy. Yeah.
Super. Apparently, when Andromeda and the Milky Way collide, no stars will be hurt. That's how much space there is between stars. 2 galaxies will collide and not a star will touch each other. Rowan, you got your hand up.
Well, I wanted to make sure I could follow the. I wanted to make sure I could follow your suit. Just to build on what you and Dave said about, could we build effectively a map of the Milky Way, and all the stars, and track their relative positions, relative time. There is someone who's working on that at the moment. Really, really, really cool woman named Eleonora Zari. So she's in Galaxies and Cosmology in the Max Planck Institute for Astronomy. I'll type her name down in the comments. She's really cool. She's been in a couple of my documentaries. Eleonora Zari.
This is how we figure stuff out. Amazing.
Yeah.
I will.
So
you have a contact to her. That would be great. If not, I will just reach out to her on LinkedIn.
Absolutely. I'll see if I have one. I think it should be .mpi.de, but I'll double check and I'll post in the comments. She says that, the trouble with it is that it's like trying to map a forest, bearing in mind that you are currently lost in the forest. And, very, very simple things such as just determining the exact location of where we are in the spiral arms. It's a challenge that takes years. And then, while there are other things like, seeing the evolution of like galaxies over time through very, very, immense simulations that take petabytes of data. Again, it's, as Kipik said, they are purely speculation based. And, when they run these simulations, there is a certain point where it's like, well, okay, even though we know that Andromeda is going to pass through this point, there's very little we can know for certain about what will happen with the stellar stream. So that's when, I'm sure I'm probably preaching to the choir here. This is when, you have a object of immense gravitational attraction literally dragging stars out of their relative positions, and we can actually see these coming over. And in more extreme cases, you get what are known as jellyfish galaxies, where a galactic collision has literally ripped and completely transmogrified, the two galaxies together. They're really, really cool. Very, very heavy metal. But yeah, she's a great person to talk to and just generally an all-round really cool person. I think you'd like her.
Amazing.
I wish I knew her when I was learning to do the pulsar maps. That was really intense.
Yeah. That's why we're lucky that our message only goes out to to interstellar space in like the mid 2030s. We got time. We got time to find all.
We got time to keep working on it.
Amazing, beautiful, special people. I think I'm gonna call it because I haven't eaten dinner and it's getting dark here. You can see I've just turned around. Amy, thank you so very much.
My pleasure. Thank you all.
For talking. And yeah, thank you all if you're still here. And I'm now going to push stop on the recording.